So for this jump start, let's talk about different sets of numbers. The first set that we have of numbers is called natural numbers. These are numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The next set is whole numbers. Whole numbers includes all of the natural numbers, but it also includes 0. So we have 0. We could have numbers like 10, 11, 12, and 13. Integers are whole numbers, but they could be positive or negative. So we could have numbers like -6, 6, -10, 10, and -7. These are whole numbers that are either positive or negative. Rational numbers are numbers that can be represented as a ratio or as a fraction. So we could have numbers like 1/2, -2/3, 3.7, which is like 37 over 10, -0.18, which is like -18 over 100, and 0.3 bar, which is 1/3. Then we have irrational numbers. These are numbers that cannot be represented as a ratio. For example, pi. There are many ratios that get close to pi, but none that are quite exactly pi. Or something like 3 square root 5. Could also have something like 8 minus 2 square root 3, 1 plus square root 2, or even negative square roots. All of those would be irrational because they cannot be represented by a ratio. Now, any number that is either rational or irrational would be classified as a real number. So real numbers can include things like decimals. So we could put 2.2. They can have things like negative fractions, -8 over 5. They could have things like square roots, square root 3 over 2. They could even have something like I squared, because I squared is equal to -1, which would be a real number, because that would be one of the integers. So I squared, when it simplifies, is still a real number. And 27 to the 2/3, well, that's a power. We can put that right here, 27 to the 2/3. Okay. Now, once we finish talking about real numbers, now we have imaginary numbers. So imaginary numbers are always going to be in the form of bi, and it's going to be plus or minus, so you can have a positive sign or a negative sign here, but you're going to have some number here. That's going to be a number, and then you're going to have the letter I. So an imaginary number could be something like 3i, -2i, I square root 5. And in this case, we could have write it as square root 5i, but we have a tendency to put the I first so that we don't accidentally think that the I is inside of the square root. The square root of -1, which is defined as I. And then we also have the square root of -27. The square root of any negative number would be imaginary. Okay. And then we have complex numbers. Complex numbers are always going to take the form a plus or minus bi, where you're going to have some number here, another number here, and then I. Now, it is also worth noting that complex numbers don't have to have both of these terms, because if your a value is 0, if a equals 0, then you have a complex number in the form of bi. And if your b value is 0, then the imaginary part cancels out, and then you just have a number like a. So a complex number could look like 5 minus I, could look like -I square root 7. This would be an example of where the a part canceled out. You could have -6 minus 5i. You could have 3 plus 2i. Or you could have 70. 70 would be a part where the b value canceled out. Okay, so here are a bunch of different examples of numbers and where they fall in our number system.